Hi, I'm Derek Ashong. Welcome to the stream. This is our pre-show. We talk here about some of the issues of the day. We're going to be going live on television in just a few, and as always, after the broadcast, we will be back here online talking in greater depth about some of the issues that we've raised. Joining me today, Sana Saeed. Sana, great to have you back on the couch. So there have been some really interesting things in the news. Before we dive into them, I want to reach out to Ahmed and Jillian. I know that they're kicking it in Toronto. Can you guys hear us okay?
Yeah.
Yep.
All right.
Here.
Okay, so there was a very interesting piece of news this morning, and that was the arrest of Ratko Mladic by the Serbian authorities. Now, for those who don't know, this is a guy who was basically the military spear at the head of the Serbian war in Bosnia back during the mid-1990s. He was the military leader, and he is the person who is charged with having perpetrated the massacre at Srebrenica. So what do you guys think is the implication of them having captured him after 16 years on the lam? Osama bin Laden wasn't on the run for 10 years even. This guy has been 16 years away from justice.
Well, I mean, I think it's going to be really interesting. Today Sarkozy was also discussing Serbia's entry into the European Union as well, and how this probably really boosts their application. So I think it's going to be it's going to help their case, and so it should make for, I think, an interesting next couple of days.
I think that's it. Well, what do you think, Jillian? Any thoughts on the whole situation?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just unbelievable, and I think it'll be interesting to watch what comes next. You know, we haven't really been following the news here at this conference. So.
Yeah. I figure you guys have got plenty to do. I see you guys drove right into the conference and just parked in the middle of the building.
Did you like our new car?
Your car is very nice. It's very nice. I like the sign next to it. Are there some Al Jazeera people there?
Yeah, we've got Al Jazeera in the house at Mesh.
No doubt. That's what's up. So for folks who are tuning in right now, this is to our understanding, this is the first ever 3-camera live remote via Skype. Right? So we're making broadcast history here.
I believe it.
We're telling people
it's pretty trippy to watch from here. From
the
studio, it's pretty trippy.
But they look pretty good. So now I wanted to come back to this Mladic thing though, because you mentioning that Sarkozy is saying, okay, well, they should consider letting Serbia into the EU. I really wonder about what the EU is going to be doing and what it's going to be looking like in the wake of the current debt crisis facing some of these countries, because I think that the big question that I would be considering is not whether or not Serbia fits with sort of the political and justice, judicial models of the EU, but whether or not they are going to become a financial burden or they're going to be a financial boon to the rest of the place. It doesn't seem like Germany wants to keep bailing people out.
I think that's an excellent point, and I think that's probably going to be a huge point to be considered in the entrance of Serbia into the European Union. So there's no guarantee, but like I said, I think this does help their case, but obviously there's no guarantee. So.
Yeah, it's a trip. So you guys, now I know y'all are up there doing your thing at Mesh. Have you guys heard anything though about the E8 conference going on in Europe?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, so my organization signed a civil society letter along with, I think, over 30 organizations, sort of calling for more attention to civil society and free expression. And then I just saw in the news that Mark Zuckerberg actually said, the internet should not be regulated; it should be open. I was very surprised by that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, but then think about it, like, if the internet was regulated, that would actually be a big problem for Mark Zuckerberg, just from the business perspective. You know what he means when he says that doesn't necessarily mean we want all the revolutionaries to be jumping up on the web.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting statement, and I'm kind of curious to see what the reactions. I know a couple of the people who got to go, and I'm really curious to hear, what their reactions about the whole thing are.
Why do you think are like the actual basis or the grounds for why internet companies and free speech groups like EFF are really against this? Like just the fundamental basis.
Well, I mean, I think a lot of it comes down to, yesterday we saw a talk by Ron Diebert of the Citizen Lab at University of Toronto over here, and it was, about basically the borders. We don't want to put borders on cyberspace. We've already got that issue with countries censoring the internet, but I think it makes it really difficult for companies to operate too.
Right.
So given that you guys are in Canada and Sana is Canadian, I want to ask about this. Yeah, we want to put this right to you.
What a coincidence!
What a coincidence! Imagine that. We traded. We sent y'all up there. We brought her down here.
Yeah, but they went to Toronto, not Montreal.
That's true. It's not quite as cool. Listen, I understand that the Canadian internet has Canadian ISPs have different form of regulation in here, and that actually, as a user, you get charged by the amount of bandwidth that you use.
Yes, I'm not up to date, unfortunately, with the law. I think recently, not too long ago, I think the government actually changed, and I think they're phasing that out, if I'm not mistaken. But I'm not completely sure. But yeah, we have that kind of system in Canada where we do get charged.
Yeah, I mean that's like being with a bad mobile phone provider. Where, like,
it definitely. Okay, yeah.
That's like being with any American mobile phone provider, isn't it?
Well, it used to be
I have
that
unlimited data on my plan.
But that's the thing. Like, it used to be that, like, if you downloaded, like, if your download speed was low, that was the only limitation.
Right.
And so now they're trying to actually institutionalize it. And it's funny. There's this. Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry.
I mean, Ahmed is popular over there.
The founder, frankly. No, that was the founder. One of the founders of this this conference.
Yeah.
Of the Mesh conference.
We had talked about this very.
Those guys are up there making mad friends. Listen, for what we understand, it was up until 2008. Canada had open access. Now, then they started regulating, or at least metering the bandwidth. What impact does that have on innovation of internet companies in Canada?
Honestly, I don't know, because that's not something I unfortunately follow too much, but I can't tell you what kind of impact it has on you as a student. I mean, you're a student, you're not working, hard to pay the bills. I mean, you downloading some music or some movies or whatever, probably should admit that. But
you don't download anything. What are you talking about? You just read the news.
But I mean, it's a lot of actually people didn't know when that switch was made. So when you start getting your internet bill, all of a sudden it's like, why do I owe almost $200, $300 for my internet bill? So there were a lot of people who were shocked about that.
That's crazy. Ahmed and Jillian, we're going to let you guys go because we're getting ready to go on air. So we'll talk to you in just a sec.
Great.
All right, sounds good.
All right, cool. Yeah, that's a trip because I'm like, I always think Canada is the land of milk and scissor. And, that's where you guys have free healthcare and all this stuff. But if you have to pay for internet bandwidth, I don't think so.
I pay right now, I think about $60.
We're going to be live on the air in just a second. So thanks for joining us. We're going to get right into the show. We've got some really important issues that we're covering today. Stay with us. We'll be live in a sec. Hi, I'm Derek Ashong, and you are now in the stream, a social media community with its own daily TV show. We're bringing you, as always, stories that are ongoing, global, and sourced from social media. Today, why the rumblings of revolution in Morocco are not being heard across the world, and what protesters are doing to get their message out. On the couch with us for a second day is blogger, journalist, and Kebab Fest editor Sana Saeed. Sana, welcome. Talk to us a little bit about the research you're doing.
Okay, so I'm doing research where I'm writing a social history of the series of meetings and general discourse during the 90s, during the interim Oslo period from 93 to the Camp David summit on the future of Palestinian refugees in Lebanon.
So you must have been watching closely these conversations that have happened between Obama and Netanyahu, the presentations at AIPAC this week.
I was really excited it's the only point I think during the speech where I was excited of Obama's speech, which was when he said that the two most important parts for the Israelis and Palestinians is the issue of Jerusalem and then refugees. I was just like, hey, my research is relevant. That's great.
Well, we're going to hope that this is something that does find resolution sooner than later, but we'll be able to look at you for some additional insights as we go, because you are indeed an expert in that arena. Also joining us today, as always, is our digital producer, Ahmed Shiab Eldin. As you'll notice, he's not on the couch. He's joining us via Skype from Toronto, where he's attending the MESH web conference. With him is Jillian York, who's the Director of International Freedom of Expression at the Electronic Frontier Foundation. It's an organization that defends freedom on the internet. She also writes for Global Voices, and she's lived in Morocco, and so we're going to be getting some of her insights on that momentarily. But Jillian, first, tell us a little bit about what MESH is all about and what you're doing there.
Sure. Well, this is a really fantastic internet conference in Canada, and so you've got a lot of Canada's internet luminaries here, but there's two different tracks. Yesterday we were talking about media and society, and so Ahmed and I were both on different panels about that, and today is all about marketing and PR, so it's very cool.
Interesting. And so, Ahmed, what kind of stuff, I know you've been busy with the conference elements, but what kind of stuff have you been hearing from people in the stream?
Yeah, we've been talking a lot here about digital activism, and on the stream, we've got some updates from Uganda where, as we've been covering in recent weeks, there's an unprecedented uprising. In mid-April, it was dubbed the Walk to Work campaign, and it's essentially about soaring food and fuel costs. They've been challenging President Museveni's presidency for over a month. He's been in power, actually, for a quarter of a century, and we got a tweet from Brian Sebuyira to inform us that the Ugandan police are on the hunt for 130 cars that took part in the Hoot for Change campaign, where everyone at 5 p.m. was asked to honk their horns, and the Walk to Work movement. He says the roadblocks on entry point to the hills of Kampala have been set up.
Wait, so people took part in this protest where at a certain p.m. on Mondays, at 5 p.m. you're supposed to honk your horn, and basically they're looking for the cars that were honking?
Yeah, so this is a new tactic that people are doing, and so they're essentially setting up roadblocks to look for these cars. And across the world, we have another story, an update that we want to share with everyone. We received a video on our website from a user that shows footage from Madrid in the Puerta del Sol, which is the main square in Madrid, and it shows Spanish protesters holding a minute of silence, as you can see here, for the victims of Syria's military repression. So, correlating, people are kind of showing solidarity across the world. And just to remind you, protests have gathered in Spain to protest corruption and the electoral system, which favors a two-party system, which many people feel doesn't work. And for weeks they've been gathering in this main square. I don't know if you can see one of the posters at the square. If we just fast forward a tiny bit, right there in the yellow, it says "Sin casa, sin futuro, sin miedo," which means no house, no future, no fear. Mm-hmm. So, if you want to participate in the stream, if you want to share your stories with us, whether we're in Canada, no matter where you are, you can always do it on our website, in our Feed the Stream box, or, of course, you can tweet us at AJStream.
Меня зовут Майя Гулиева, я работаю в Всемирном банке, and I'm in the stream.
As the push for democracy continues across the Arab world, demonstrations in one North African country are not getting the same attention as in places like Egypt, Tunisia, or Libya. For months now, protesters in Morocco have been demanding greater rights and freedoms, but that story has been largely bypassed by the global media. What's happening now is it seems that young people and social media users are actually using these tools of citizen journalism to actually get their word out. This particular image is one that we have from an article we were looking at on this particular piece, and it shows a young man who seems to have potentially been hurt by police in Morocco. We're going to have some footage later on that will actually show police actively beating one person. There have been some really interesting things about this Moroccan issue in the sense that the violence that we've seen on the streets, irrespective of whether some say protesters created, some say security forces, it has been much less than what we've seen in places like Tunisia, Egypt, and certainly Libya. Jillian, I want to come to you on this because I know you've written a piece for the Al Jazeera website about what's happening in Morocco, and having lived there and worked there, can you talk to us a little bit about why the international media has not taken as strong an interest in the occurrences in Morocco?
Sure. Well, the thing about Morocco is that there are a lot of people who do support the government and the monarchy. But there is this protest movement, the February 20th movement, that kind of came up around the same time that Egyptians were pushing to get Mubarak out. And in terms of the attention, I think what's happening here is that this has just gone on for so long now, and there's so much else happening in the world, and particularly the Dominique Strauss-Kahn affair in the Francophone media, that this just really isn't getting the attention that other protests have gotten. I think people have just kind of been burnt out by news.
Well, Jillian, then I want to ask you, can the problem be is that we're looking, I don't know much about the protest history in Morocco, how often it happens, etc., but Is it possible that we're really looking at this purely in the lens of, again, the aftermath of Tunisia, Egypt, and all that, and therefore, if it's something that's happened before, did not receive much attention, then do you understand what I'm saying?
No, I think that's a really great question. Morocco does have, frequent protests on the streets, and not a whole lot of repression in that sense. People can go out and protest. And so, but in this case, we've seen thousands and thousands of people in different cities across the country, really at levels never seen before, at least in recent years. And then the other thing is that people are speaking out against the monarchy as they've never really done before. That's really kind of unprecedented there. It's one of the red lines that you don't cross in the media. And so, I do think that it's complicated by the fact that we've had revolution elsewhere, whereas here this might not be revolution, it might just be, incremental change.
Ahmed, what kind of stuff are people saying online on this issue?
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned that because Morocco has a young tech-savvy population, as Jillian knows, and it's, a country of 31 million people, but 25 million people have cell phones, and the internet users are 13 million, so that's almost half. And one blogger in particular, who Jillian actually interviewed in an article that appears on Al Jazeera, his name is Hisham Al-Mirat, just tweeted us in saying, to get a better sense of struggle for mainstream media coverage of uprising in Morocco, take a look at this. And it's a link. And this is, a lot of the conversation, people feel that there's no media coverage, and so they're struggling to understand why. But this link essentially gives you a sense of a lot of different mainstream media networks and why, as you can see way down below, Morocco is one of the last countries that's getting coverage. And there's, Jillian, maybe you could talk to that a little bit.
Yeah, basically, Morocco does get some mainstream media coverage. France 24 is one of the major ones, Al Jazeera, of course. But Al Jazeera's also had struggles in the country, and magazines and newspapers have been regularly shut down in Morocco for crossing red lines or for doing things that the government didn't like. And so it's kind of a complex issue.
Yeah. Now, Jillian, I want to get another point from you, because in a moment we're going to be talking with a couple of activists who are on the ground in Morocco who have some different views about what's actually happening on the ground and why. But before we go to them, given that you have written this piece to give broader context, let's talk a little bit about how citizen media is now partnering with mainstream media to try to amplify the stories. What exactly are people doing?
Yeah, so, one of the things that we saw in Tunisia was the success of Nawat. And, Sami Ben Garbia is one of the founders of that. I know him very well. And that was very influential for a lot of people. And so Hisham, who started Mamfakinch in Morocco, saw Nawat as sort of a successful model for, reporting on local events, but then getting mainstream attention to what was being reported on the site. And so they're replicating that model and realizing that, a citizen media site can't necessarily get the news out, but they can provide an accurate picture that really kind of helps the mainstream media report on a subject. And so that's what we're seeing there.
Now, is there to some degree a possibility that the Morocco issue may be overblown? People are saying that, hey, it's not been as violent, it's not been as stark, there haven't been as many people in the streets as in certain other places. Could it simply be a case that the media is not covering it because it's not a revolution?
Sure, and it may not be a revolution, but at the same time, I do think that because these people are fighting for something, fighting for change in their country, that they do deserve some sort of media attention to help the world see what's happening. And, as we've seen, getting international attention toward a cause goes a long way toward sort of affecting change. And so I think that while this may not be a revolution, while it may just be small change, I think that they still deserve the same kind of coverage that other countries have gotten.
Okay, I also want to get another question in, and it's probably a little controversial, but and this goes beyond Morocco, but do you think that the international community should or does have a role in picking a side or in favoring, a particular outcome when, in the case of like Morocco, but also elsewhere, where the majority seems to be rather, okay with the status quo, more or less, for better or for worse?
Right. Yeah, that's a great question. And I think, like I said, there are a lot of people in the country who do support the regime. This is by no means like Tunisia and Egypt in the sense that you had a large majority that wanted the leaders out. But at the same time, you've got this sort of, I don't want to say propaganda, but you've got a kind of cyber war happening between different factions, both in Morocco and in Syria, as you guys have talked about before, where you've got sort of these different opinions going back and forth on places like Twitter. And it is difficult for the international community to sort of discern what's happening. And so I'm not suggesting that they should necessarily favor a certain outcome, But it's very hard to get information right now about what's happening on the ground in Morocco, and that concerns me.
You know, there's something else, Derek, that I just want to quickly reference that's been missing from this conversation in the mainstream media. You know, there were reports on Twitter several weeks ago that Jordan and Morocco might be joining the GCC, and the implications of that are huge. I mean, Morocco has one of the most well-trained and largest armies in the Arab world, so you could see the incentive on Saudi Arabia's side. We have a tweet from Sultan Al-Qasimi, who's a UAE blogger, and I just want to share it. He's saying, you know, and this story is being covered on Twitter, basically the GCC might be turning into a club for Arab monarchies. So I think that's an interesting aspect of the story.
That is a really interesting aspect. And I haven't honestly been able to talk to enough Moroccans to know how they really feel about the whole GCC.
Well, you know, to that point, we are actually going to speak with a couple of Moroccans about this stuff. Before we do, I want to point out a tweet that just came to us online that illustrates some of the controversy around this. You know, from @RevolutionInfos is saying there have been martyrs and a lot of violence from the authorities. Say the truth, please. So people, and what we're going to do now is we're going to take an opportunity to talk to two people on the ground in Morocco, one of whom feels that the idea of the violence has been overblown, another one who's like, no, there have been some serious crimes committed. I want to thank you, Jillian and Ahmed, for joining us for Toronto on a 3-camera Skype remote shoot. I think this is the first time anyone has done a 3-camera remote shoot via Skype on broadcast television, so thank you for joining us.
Thanks.
And remember, if you want to share your stories with us, tweet us @AJStream. This is a story that we did because our community has been asking us to tell it. They've been telling us that people are ignoring Morocco, and that is the reason why we covered it. If you have a story you want to cover, tweet us @AJStream. Next, we're going to speak with two people on the ground in Morocco.
मेरा नाम सोफिया क्रशी है मैं अल जज़ीरा में काम करती हूँ and I'm on the stream.
The Arab Spring revolutions have underlined the influence and reach of social media. In Morocco, protesters are using the same tools not only to mobilize and march for their rights, but also to maintain the momentum of their movement. As we mentioned, Sana, some people are saying that, you know what, this is a big deal, there's some real violence that's on the ground. Some people are saying that, you know, it's not really that bad. There's a video that came into us through our Shark system here at Al Jazeera where people are able to upload their own videos to us, which we then try to verify the best we can. And this is one that is indicating some imagery that's coming out of Morocco. I'm hoping it's going to load swiftly and we'll be able to get a little bit of a visual of what's going on. But in a nutshell, this image and others that we've received show people being beaten by the police. And I'm just going to maximize this for a quick second. Now, I'm going to stop it there. As you can see, this is an image where the police are actively, you know, it seems like they're having a confrontation with this gentleman, but you don't see thousands of people in the street. So is it a case where when you don't have so many people out in the street, maybe the voices of the protesters are not as easy to hear, or perhaps there's a legitimate argument that maybe this is not a movement of a majority of the people?
Right. I mean, exactly. Numbers speak. But again, if it's a good thing or a bad thing, numbers speak, and the fact that you don't have images of thousands in the street. I mean, one of the things, for instance, in Egypt, where they were saying up to 2 million people in Tahrir, right? That was significant. If you have even just a few hundred people, you know, somewhere in Marrakesh, that's not going to get the attention that it may deserve. So that does make a huge difference for sure.
I mean, I think it's really interesting in that this is an image of a guy, and I want to say before I blow it up, this guy is alive. It looks very dangerous when you first see him, but I do want to share this because there are arguments being made that there's some serious violence going down on the ground. And this also came to us through our Shark system, user-generated video, and here we see a gentleman who is, I mean, he's knocked out cold. We see he's bleeding from his face. People are concerned. Now, as the video goes on, you'll see him start to move his lips, and he starts to move his arm, which is why we knew that he was still alive. We wouldn't show you a picture of him this way if he was dead. But when you see an image of a guy like this, face bloody, it's very hard to then accept the idea that, well, no, nothing's happening in Morocco. I did see a tweet that was given by a parliamentary official that was saying, nothing happening in Morocco, just a few protesters, the rest are enjoying Mawazine 2011 festival, so oblivious. And it really seems that at a certain point, there is kind of a media conflict where people are trying to use traditional and social media to define what is or is not happening. Now, to help us get a little bit more insight into what is going down on the ground, we have joining us from Casablanca, journalist and blogger Aida Alami, who writes extensively about religion, economics, and politics. Also with us is Moroccan photographer Otmane Yssef. Welcome both of you to the stream. Otmane, I want to start with you. Can you tell us a little bit about what's happening in Morocco? Is this a revolution or are the stories overblown?
Well, thank you for having us. I think I wouldn't call it a revolution. It is a kind of revolution in ideas, maybe, in the way people are starting to debate on the internet mostly. But if you're speaking about the streets of Morocco, there is no revolution. There are protests, massive ones, sometimes less massive. Sometimes facing police brutality, and that's sad, and that shouldn't happen again. Sometimes not facing police brutality. But I would like to correct something that the woman that was talking before in the show said. Never. Please
do so. And Otmane, before you do so, I just want to let our viewers know that your video is frozen, but your audio is coming through clearly. So please continue.
Okay. So she said that she thought that never protest of this, such massive protests happen in Morocco. I would just like to remind people that in December or November 2010, not so long ago, there were 2 million people in the streets of Casablanca, not 5,000 or 10,000.
What were they protesting for at that time?
They were not protesting against inside politics. They were actually showing their support for the Moroccan policy in the Sahara. Because I have to remind our viewers also that Morocco is a country that doesn't have its own frontiers.
I want to interrupt you. I want to interrupt you there, Otmane, because the Western Sahara issue is a complex one which we're not covering today, and we have not given our viewers context. But I do want to get a response from Aida. Aida, you've heard what Otmane has said. He's saying that there really aren't massive numbers of people in the streets, that this is not a revolution per se. How would you respond?
Okay, what I would like to say is that indeed what's happening in Morocco is very different from Egypt and Tunisia in the sense that people are not asking massively for a change of regime. There are fewer people in the streets, but there are some of the same problems here that are in other North African countries, meaning a demand for more social justice, problems with corruption, unemployment, poverty, and so on. And I don't know what you call a revolution. I would say that people are out there demanding change. The numbers in the streets are not necessarily representative of what the whole country thinks, because I've spoken to a lot of people who are demanding the same things and are not necessarily walking in the streets.
Mm-hmm. And so, Sana, I want to get your thoughts there. I know that you've got a tweet up. Could you read it to us?
Yes, I've got a tweet from Feb 20 USA. And here she writes, on Sunday, police used force to disperse protests. Do you think that this is the beginning of escalating violence in Morocco?
Aida, would you respond to that?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear it. Can you say that again?
The question was, on Sunday, police used force to disperse protests. Do you think this is the beginning of escalating violence in Morocco?
I don't know. I can't answer that question. There has certainly been a shift. Because for the first weeks, people were allowed to protest peacefully. I've been to almost every protest. We didn't see any authorities anywhere near the protest. People marched. The protest would last a couple of hours. But since May, there definitely has been a shift. The authorities are massively on the streets, not allowing people to walk and trying to disperse the protests.
Otmane, I want to get your thoughts on something. When we put out the word that we were going to have this conversation, we let people know that we're going to be talking to you. There was a strong response, and some people said that we shouldn't speak to you in particular, and that you were soft on the issues, or you were not representing what was really happening on the ground. Can you speak a little bit about what is the nature of the discourse? Is there a lot of disagreement between Moroccans about what is actually happening, or do you feel that the society as a whole tends to be of a common accord about the changes people are looking for?
No, as you can see, there is a lot of let's say, conversations on the internet, not to say fights, because there has been some insulting. You see some people say you shouldn't even talk to me. I mean, I don't consider myself being a tyrant or a dictator or anything. I actually support 99% of the amelioration they're asking for. I support almost all of them. What I'm afraid of is the manipulation and the timing. I mean, putting this protest at the same time as Tunisia and Egypt, it makes it like a cousin of the revolutions and maybe asking for that kind of outcome. I mean, pushing the regime to its end, because they've been asking for some stuff like some jobs for the graduate people. They got some. They were asking for a change of constitution. And even before big pressure from the street, the king agreed to make a new constitution.
So let me get Aida to respond to that. Aida, is this perhaps the reason that there hasn't been as much coverage of the Moroccan uprising? Is it because the Moroccan regime has been more conciliatory?
I think Morocco has always appeared as the most stable country of the region. That's one of the reasons. People didn't even think there would be protests at first. When Tunisia happened, all the speculators said that Moroccans will never get in the streets. So that was the first surprise, I think.
Oh,
so, Anna, go ahead.
Yeah, I want to. Sorry.
I'm sorry. Go ahead, Otmane.
I would just like to say that if you want to go into comparisons, any other Arab country or Muslim country that had a revolution this last few months, for Morocco it's been going on for 3 months. We didn't have, I'm sorry to take it to numbers, but we didn't have hundreds of deaths, not even tens. I mean, this is a big difference also. Even if there is police brutality and it should be fought against, people in Twitter, because we're talking about media on the internet also, Morocco has had a free access to internet, I mean, no censorship for years, and a lot of people have access to internet. But saying, like I read on Twitter, every single day that police is massacring...
You know, I'm sorry, Otmane, I want to get in here very quickly because I want to bring in a comment that's coming from @ImanJ on our online, who's saying, what are the demands of the people on the ground in Morocco? What do they hope to achieve from the protests? Aida, could you answer in 15 seconds, what are people looking for?
More social justice. I think that's the first thing that comes to my mind. Transparent justice. A government with real power, real political parties. People don't feel represented by their elected officials. People don't even vote because they don't think there is a point. Less social gaps.
Okay, so I'm going to ask the both of you, if you can, to spend a couple more minutes with us because we're going to take this conversation into our post show. Sana, it seems like they're actually having a very polite debate, which I like. It seems maybe that's the reason you're not having a lot of bloodshed in Morocco. I appreciate the way they're both approaching this. We're going to take this conversation onto our website, stream.aljazeera.com, where we're going to be diving a little bit deeper into what's happening and what people are looking for. Tweet us @AJStream. We will see you online. Hi, and welcome back to the Post Show. This is where we dive deeper into some of the issues that we've brought on. Today we're talking about the situation on Morocco. Basically, is this a revolution that has been ignored by the mainstream media, or is something else going on right now? Now, Sana, it seems that the idea of citizen journalism, people have been using the internet, they've been using social media platforms to spread the word about what's happening in Morocco, but they've also identified a very important element of this, which is that social media in and of itself cannot necessarily create a groundswell or inform the world about what's happening. That things tend to work better when you have this cross-fertilization of citizen journalism with an outreach to professional journalists and the broader media. Can you talk a little bit about what is the possibility, what kind of happens when the world is not watching one of these situations?
Well, I mean, what I want to challenge something that you said, which was, I mean, if we bring in traditional forms of media with social media. I think that this problem is more rooted in just our general disposition, I think, to we have a very short attention span too, right? And it's kind of, there's that saying that squeaky wheel gets the oil,
yes,
right? So I think that it's not just the limitation of social media or these different types of media on their own, but the issue is our own attention span. And now that we're
and they've been doing this for 3 months, and which is, it took a lot longer than
in Egypt. It's not as though the Egyptian revolution just kind of popped out of nowhere per se.
Yeah.
Civil society was so strong in Egypt prior to January 25th. It had been building up.
Absolutely. I think that's a really great point, and one that doesn't get discussed often enough, which is that everyone was excited about the January 25th revolution, but there have been dissidents in Egypt, and Egyptian bloggers have been renowned for speaking out against the government for years now. And so it's almost like there was fertile ground for it. Now, Morocco, I don't know that there's necessarily been the same kind of upswell of concern against the regime, but it also seems that the regime is not quite as repressive. Otmane raises an interesting point, which is that despite the fact that this has been going on for 3 months, and despite the fact that, yes, police seem to be cracking down more violently, as we've seen in these videos, that there have been a relatively small number of deaths that have been reported. Now, we're hearing from Twitter, @HishamG is saying most of the violence perpetrated by the police could not possibly be covered by mainstream media. And that's where citizen media comes to the fore. When we're looking at this, how do we then sort of find that balance between deciding, because we might see a video here and there that might seem like, this is really painful footage. Like, we see a guy, he's bloody, we see a guy being beaten, but could it be that that's not representative of what's really going down in general? Or could it be a situation where, because citizen media in Morocco may not be as robust, as established as it was in Egypt, maybe we're not seeing enough?
Yeah, no, exactly. And I think this points to another limitation of all forms of media, right? What we end up seeing, what we base our judgments on and our knowledge on is purely on what we see. And what we see has particular interests behind it, whether or not we agree with them. Talking again, maybe play a bit more devil's advocate, but this also reminds me of some of the critiques that were coming out of the coverage of Bahrain, right? Regardless of where you stand, there were a lot of people who were saying, no, this coverage is, whether or not you agree with it, and again, might get some little hateful tweets about this, but just saying that, people were also saying that some of the very top tweeters, from the Al-Khwajas to the Nabil Rajab, they were critiquing them because they were saying they were sensationalizing things to bring greater attention to what they're doing. And I think this isn't something, if there were not, it's irrelevant, but I think that critique is something that applies to all forms of media, social or traditional.
Absolutely. I think that's such a great point. And it's almost like, people think of the media as something that observes. There's this idea of the impartiality of media. We observe what's happening and we simply report on what's happening. But there's the principle in physics that the process of observing a reaction or observing an experiment actually impacts that experiment. And I think the same thing applies to media and its role in the world.
It ends up being a catalyst.
It's a total catalyst, exactly. If something's happening, it's like they have that saying, if a tree falls in the forest and nobody's there to hear it, does it make a sound? And I'm always like, if a tree falls in the forest and nobody's there to hear it, who cares? That's the reality of the world that we live in. It still fell. Maybe it didn't, right? Because somebody will tell you that the tree was felled by drug addicts and Al-Qaeda and Israeli Americans coming in from the Pakistani Taliban.
You forgot the neocons.
The neocons, all of them collaborated to fell the tree.
Right.
Someone else will tell you, the tree was old, the tree was rotting. Literally, if no one is there to hear it, what does it matter? Because sadly, people's stories are ignored so often if there isn't the ability to tell those stories. And so I guess the thing that I'm thinking about with the Moroccan situation is, for us, our job is to try to provide a perspective, an opportunity for people to dive in and understand what's happening. But how do we balance that goal with the reality that, there's not that much coverage coming out of Morocco at this point. So you're stuck between this place of, is it because there isn't something happening, that what's going down there is not of the magnitude of what's happening in Bahrain and Syria and Yemen? Or is it a matter of, it's not of that magnitude because we're not telling the story? And if people were telling the story more, that perhaps the protest or the movement in general would have more traction.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, you make a great point as well, and it's, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So I want to bring up another image that I think it reflects the same issue. Now, this is an image from Egypt, and this was put up by an artist called Ganzir. And this gentleman, basically, I'll scroll down a little bit so that we can see. It says, artist known as Ganzir arrested today in downtown Cairo while posting this poster, Freedom Mask, brought to you by the Supreme Council of Armed Forces for an unlimited time. And basically, it's a guy who's been masked and muzzled. So what Ganzir is basically saying, in a nutshell, is that, you have an old regime which we protested against, we fought, we had a literal revolution in Egypt to oust Mubarak, to try to get rid of the remnants of his party, and now you have the military step in. Initially, people saw them as heroes, but now some folks are arguing that the military is imposing some of the same kind of constraints on freedom of expression and of speech as the prior regime. Yeah, no, definitely. And I think it's something that we forget, at least sitting here, and obviously Egyptians are well aware of this. I mean, Mubarak, he was a military guy. The military, essentially Mubarak also became a liability for the military. So they kind of pushed him out too. So, it's not as though the military, it's great that we now do see, there have been a lot of changes so far, maybe not significant enough, but it's a long road still for recovery, quote unquote. But the military is just it's actually probably the biggest institution that needs reform, and it is probably the biggest remnant of the previous regime. If not, it is still the same regime, but maybe a bit lighter and sweet. Well, I think you raise a great point that it was a military regime from the beginning. It's a military regime now. It remains to be seen whether this military is supporting the regime or the people. I want to take this story to the other side of the world right now, because we do have joining us. We heard the story of José Claudio Ribeiro da Silva. People know him in Brazil as Ze Claudio, and he is known as a major defender of the Amazon forest. This week, he and his wife were found shot dead. It's a story that is being reported, but you haven't had a lot of mainstream media on the ground. As we've been talking today about the power of media to raise awareness about things and to help set the agenda of what people perceive as important, we're lucky to have an Al Jazeera reporter on the ground there in Brazil. Gabe, great to have you on. Tell us where you are and what you're reporting on.
I'm up in the northeast Amazon state of Pará, Derek, in a town called Marabá. This is where the José Claudio Ribeiro and his wife were killed a couple days ago, and we arrived here the day after they were killed, and have been reporting on their murders of the environmentalists for the last 48 hours or so on Twitter and on Al Jazeera's website, and as well as the main TV channel.
Now, this is somewhat breaking news, and Ze Claudio has been a well-known activist for a long time. Has there been any sort of upswell of negative response to his work, or has there been anything that has preceded this that people feel might have precipitated their killing?
Well, it's kind of complicated, but the short answer to that is that he was a defender of the Amazon, and in this region of Brazil, it's called Terra Sem Lei, land without laws. That's at least what a lot of Brazilians call it, and that's because a lot of people that defend the environment here run the risk of crossing or upsetting big logging interests and other interests here. And so I was just doing an interview before I'm speaking to you with a lawyer here that said there's over 40 people just in this region where I'm at now, environmentalists and what have you, that have been having death threats against them just in the last year. So this was building for several years with him. But
what is the conflict about? Is it about logging? Is it that they're trying to go against logging? Is it clear cutting? I mean, what is happening to the environment there?
Well, they are clear-cutting the forest here, and some of it's done legally. We need to make that clear, but a lot of it's done illegally. And this is being done here, especially in this part of the Amazon. And Ze Claudio was kind of pushing back against that. And he was using tools of social media. I mean, he was using small digital cameras and sending emails and what have you to officials here denouncing this clear cutting of the Amazon, and that was a threat to people that were doing it illegally.
Well, Gabe, I want to thank you so much. Muito obrigado for joining us and for giving us this report. We want to wish you good luck as you go forward, and we'll keep tabs on the story as it evolves.
All right. Thank you, Derek.
Thank you so much. So, Sana, I mean, it really has clearly been a day all about the media. Yeah. It seems like people are taking greater charge of telling their stories.
Okay, guys. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, no, for sure. It's good, right? It ends up being a bit of a double-edged sword, but I think it's good because now I think unlike ever before, we are seeing this amazing flow of information, and this is really the democratization of knowledge and information because it's so easily available and whatnot. So it's great to see it, and it's great to see maybe where this is going to head.
Well, you know, that's what we're all about here, is the democratization of information, and we always want you to be a participant. So if you have a story you want us to cover, definitely tweet us at AJStream. That's it for our show today. We'll be back on Monday. In the meantime, we will see you online.